If you had a task to neutralize Russian dictator Putin, how would you do that?
Which one of them he is. One thing about Russia is it's only ever one day away from collapse. And that day might be tomorrow, or we might have to wait another 2 years. But when it does, it will go. Lots of people are unhappy because, we're not bombing Moscow in the center of Moscow and killing lots of people. Hard luck. We did it in Second World War. It doesn't do much for your morale. There's one absolute rule, which is that air defense is the one system where quality counts. There is no second chance. If you miss, you miss.
What should be Ukraine's next step then?
It's got to take back Crimea.
Russia cannot admit defeat, but Ukraine should not assume the strikes on oil refineries alone will bring the Kremlin to its knees. Moscow is under pressure, its fuel system is strained, and its rare areas are becoming less safe, and its war economy is paying a higher price. But Russia is still able to kill Ukrainian civilians on a massive scale. So what is Ukraine's next strategy? Where can it become stronger, more resilient, and more dangerous for Russia? My special guest today is Colonel Glen, a retired British Army officer, military analyst, and a longtime friend of Ukraine. Welcome, sir, to the studio, and thank you for coming here.
No, thank you for inviting me.
So, you have arrived to Ukraine when the Russian attacks intensified so heavily. And I have a lot to unpack here. So why are you here? First of all, why are you here in Ukraine at this time, at this period of time? And how would you describe those massive attacks on Ukrainian cities with the Russian ballistics almost every night?
Why I'm here right now is because it's important to be in Kyiv, in Ukraine, when the things are bad. They say, no, anybody can come in. Anybody can come in on the train, shake hands with officials, and rush away again on the train the next night. And lots and lots and lots of people do that. And I don't think that that's right. It's not showing solidarity. Showing solidarity is when you're in the bunker with everybody, and you're there overnight, and you've got to get up, you go back to bed, and you've got to get up again and go back down to the bunker. And you go back to bed, and you've got to go back down to the bunker again for a third or fourth time, and everybody is there. Then you can actually see what it's like. Then you can see, whether the kids are happy or unhappy, and how the mums are dealing with it, and how people are generally feeling about the whole thing that's going on. And you can't judge Ukraine otherwise. So I like to be here when it's nasty. And which is why I always stay somewhere where it's nasty. Unfortunately, it's ruined my favourite cafe shop, my favourite cafe. It's ruined my favourite supermarket, and it's ruined my favourite restaurant. But okay, that's part of the life, isn't it? And I think you've got to see that to understand that you've got to go somewhere else. You've got to do something else. It changes how you act. So I can feel that, and I can feel that it does the same for other people. That's why I'm here. The other thing is that I come here to work. I always come here to work and to do things. And at the moment, I'm working with the Olga Reshetilova, the Human Rights Ombudsman, and her team. So that's what I've been doing yesterday and today.
And why do you think Russia have intensified those attacks on Ukraine? Is that because they don't have any success?
I'm not sure they have intensified, actually. I think that there's a gradual line. I mean, actually, when I've been here before, it's been nasty. I think what they're doing is they're adding more drones and adding more rockets to it, but in a graduated fashion. So, in other words, every 10 days when they do the attack, we have quiet nights and they stack everything up and then they do a big attack. But they've actually been doing that for quite a while. It's just that the number of rockets and the number of missiles is growing. That's the worrying thing. It's growing, which means that the sanctions, the Western sanctions, and maybe even the attacks from Ukraine are still not having the full effect that they need to have on the other side.
What I mean, Glen, is it okay to call you Glen or?
Yeah. That's my name.
I know. Is that too informal?
No, not at all.
Okay, so Glenn, I just meant because at the beginning of July, Russia made a few massive attacks in Ukrainian cities, knowing that we are not having enough of air defense.
Yes.
Definitely. We don't have enough Patriots, especially in Kyiv. So, and they know that. And when you see that they're just launching rockets and none of them were neutralized in Ukrainian capital, none of them.
No.
And they all hit the targets.
Yeah.
So they were specifically...
But you can't expect them to be nice. They're at war, and therefore they take every opportunity, and they are going to keep taking the opportunity. If we don't manage to get more rockets from Europe, because we're probably not going to get them from America, then they're going to keep doing this. There isn't any question about that. But I mean, I would say one thing about, you talked about, Russia keeping going, that yeah, they will. But one thing about Russia is it's only ever one day away from collapse. And that day might be tomorrow, or we might have to wait another 2 years. But when it does, it will go. It will go and it will break and it will all go quickly and something will happen.
Oh, that's optimistic.
No, it will. Something will happen because it has. I mean, go back in history. Go back in history. They've had this before and they've broken before and they will break again. I'm sure, but it's just when, and it's, you come back to the big question is, are the Ukrainian attacks on the fuel supplies having an effect? Well, yes, we can see it in long queues, videos of long queues in Crimea, videos. Now, is that effect going to make those people hate Putin, or is it going to make them hate Ukraine? And I don't know. I really don't know. And I don't think anybody else knows. And because when they start talking to each other and arguing with each other, they could flip either way, depending upon who's doing the talking and how much is on television and what's on television or the radio or whatever. So we don't know. But something is happening in Russia now, and something will happen differently. And it will happen soon, I think. And it's either that Putin is going to realize that he's on his last legs and he has to be vicious and nasty and try to do something. But that doesn't mean to say it will happen. He might want to do something, but if there's no fuel and if his frontline soldiers are not being fed, then all his excitement about mobilization and everything, is not going to actually have much effect if they can't actually get them from A to B when they've mobilized them. If they can't train them because they've got no fuel and food. So I think that Putin's desires are not going to be as he wants. But as I said, it still doesn't mean that we know what the population is going to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. Glenn, you said, well, it's war and Russia wants to kill as much as Ukrainians as possible. But this asymmetry with the Ukraine, look how Ukraine is fighting. We're just hitting the oil refineries, some military infrastructure, logistics, and they are just hitting people, just genocide, just residential.
Yeah, and I'm going to say 100% right that it is that way, because that is Ukraine's strength. It's the country's strength internationally. The fact that there is a moral backbone to everything that's going on, and that in some ways brings another subject, which is the worrying bit that some of the military is not being as moral as they need to be. Okay, 12 years of death, facing death every day, does make people change, no question about it. But that moral underpinning of how Ukraine acts is the most important thing, the most important tool that Ukraine has in the war. And it's the one thing that will keep the international community on its side. So it's precious. And it mustn't be lost under any circumstances. Okay, lots of people are unhappy because, we're not bombing Moscow in the center of Moscow and killing lots of people. Hard luck. We did it in Second World War. It doesn't do much for your morale, long-term feelings of goodness when you think that, we bombed and shattered and destroyed Dresden and killed thousands and thousands of people. And when you read about it, I've read about it several times. It doesn't make me a happy person to read that we did something like that, because it had no military or morale effect really at all. So what we're doing is right. What Ukraine is doing, what we're doing is right. And we just got to keep plugging away at it.
Glen, we're meeting in a few days after NATO Summit in Ankara, in Turkey. What is your take on that? Should we be very optimistic with the results that are maybe even were higher than expectation were?
Possibly, possibly. I'm still not overly happy with European leaders being as strong as they could be, and I still think there's a lot of them are more concerned still with skiing and ice cream than they are with actually fighting, and we hear talks about what we're doing but they're not doing things as aggressively and actively for Ukraine as they could do. Some of them are doing more for themselves now, and maybe that's the right thing at the moment. Maybe then they can actually talk with a degree of strength and confidence when their own country is a bit stronger. I have to say, my own country, UK, is floundering badly about defence. I mean, it's if you look at the new the UK news and you follow the political arguments, you could actually hear that it is in a deep mess. I mean, we got some great soldiers, but it doesn't help if everything else isn't there. All the infrastructure that's needed, all the equipment that's needed, all the organisational structures that are needed, and UK has slipped badly.
Well, but still, recently I've heard a lot of news from the UK about their strengthening their military positions and weapon. So at least they're concerned about.
Well, they're talking about it, but talk is not the same as money. Don't forget that. Money is what counts. It's only money that counts. Money and drive to make that money, turn that money into something serious. Now, you have countries that are, like Poland, that are actually working. Germany is working. Now, whether they're doing it right in terms of, drone defence, or whether they're still thinking about World War II is another matter. But at least they are working at it at the moment. So that's a good thing for Ukraine, because when they're a bit stronger, they're more confident.
Patriot license that were promised by American President Donald Trump.
Yes.
How should we read it? I'm opening lots of Ukrainian and international media outlets, and it's a headline. It's a headline everywhere.
Yeah, it is, because people like headlines like that. The fact is that, that's part of a strategy, and it's good. The problem is implementation. And Ukraine doesn't have an organisation for actually turning that into reality in a hurry. What we need is a project office, like Open Today, not tomorrow, Open Today, and we need a Patriot whiz kid from America to come and run the project office. Someone who knows what all the parts are, how to put them together, and then we need probably 6-7 different companies who do specific parts in Ukraine to put those. I don't think it's a good idea to give it, for example, to Ukrombronprom, when it won't happen. It'll be lost in the mist of time. It's got to be active companies with very active engineers who know what they're looking at, air defence engineers who know what
somewhere
they're
in Europe?
at.
Or here in
I
Ukraine?
think we'll do it in Ukraine. I mean, we got
on the Ukrainian soil.
Yeah, why not? There is plenty of underground places we can make those.
Under Ukrainian soil.
Under Ukrainian soil, yeah, and quite deep, I would suggest. But yes, it can be done here, and maybe should be done here. But I mean, if it's got to be done in Europe, then I can promise you that countries like Latvia, where I live, will bite your arm off to make it there. And provide you with the support and the land and the buildings. I can fix that tomorrow in a country like Latvia. And I think this is the important thing, is that, I go back to it. There's got to be a sense of urgency. What have we done today already to make this happen? And the answer is probably nothing yet. But they've got to think in terms of hours and days to do this, because it's death that we're talking about. If we don't get it quickly, then it's dead people, because we've got to get this as quickly as possible. And it is possible to make things quickly. And we've seen it with drone companies in Ukraine, changing rapidly and making things rapidly. So it is possible, but it requires a state of mind, and it requires some real experts, some people who understand what they're doing. maybe a Ukrainian, maybe an American, maybe a German from an air defense company, but it needs that project manager who understands the business to drive it forward.
What is your take on Ukrainian own, together with the Germany air defense, Freya? Well, maybe it won't. Zelensky promised it's going to be ready by the end of this year, 2026. Whether it's going to change the situation, well, it's not a Patriot systems.
No, it's not. I don't know. To be blunt, I don't know whether any system coming out of Ukraine or Germany has got the quality to deal with ballistic missiles that they're throwing at us, or even the next generation of ballistic missiles, even faster and more powerful.
Maybe my question will be stupid. Why do we need that much of equality?
Because without quality, there's one absolute rule, which is that air defense is the one system where quality counts. There is no second chance. If you miss, you miss. And therefore, you have to have absolutely the best to hit something that's coming at you at high speed. There is no, lots of weapon systems, lots of equipment you can make do, but you can't make do with air defense. And having been in the Army headquarters and been working with air defence in the British Army headquarters, I know this. You have to spend the money to get the absolute best that will work. And there are systems out there that will probably work. The problem with most of them is that they are short range rather than long range. And the problem with that is when you have short range, you've got to have so many of them because you've got to put them everywhere. And then you run out of soldiers and you run out of equipment to do it. Whereas the longer range ones, you don't need so many and they can go further, which is the strength of Patriot, that actually it's got legs, as we would say. It can actually go quite a long way. And it's got all the associated equipment, which we've got here, the associated equipment, the radars and the command posts and everything else, but not the missiles.
Just to continue on the Ukrainian strikes, deep strikes into Russian oil refineries and infrastructure, Valery Zaluzhny, ex-commander-in-chief and now the ambassador of Ukraine in the UK, he recently wrote a column and where he said that we should not be that optimistic. Of course, long-range strikes, they do work, but in a short term, that's good. But it should not be that strategy that put Russia to its knees. Do you agree or not?
Yes, completely. Completely, 100%. Because you can't, any strategy, remember that whatever you do, the other side is always going to try and find a counteraction to it. Okay. And that counteraction can, in this case, can come from, from Russian innovation or Chinese innovation or a combination of Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and North Korean, because we're fighting all four of them effectively. And so, when you have the initiative, okay, you've got the initiative, but that doesn't mean to say that you're going to be able to keep it. And Russia will now, Russia's had the initiative on the front line for a long time. Now, in some areas, it's losing that initiative because of the medium-range strikes from some of the brigades that are
cutting supplies.
Yeah, cutting supplies. That's a serious dampener on the Russian front line. Okay. But again, the key thing about any strategy is that it's all about fire and maneuver. Is that when you actually do the fire, you have to do something to gain the next advantage. You cannot expect the enemy just to stop and say, "Oh, jolly good, thank you." Because they won't. They'll keep coming back in other ways. So we have the advantage, we have the initiative with doing this. Now we've got to do something with it. The next step, the next activity. You could say that Zelensky is actually doing that by some of his political maneuverings. Yeah. And his political maneuvering with Trump. The masterful line of, I'm not going to Moscow because of Ukrainian drones. Yes. Or missiles. That was masterful reply. But the fact is, we've got to do something. If we take away the logistics for the front line, then we've actually got to go and take away the enemy. Otherwise, they just got time. They'll find time, find a solution, and come back at you. So you have to accumulate these things. You have to do something with what you've got. It's not enough. It's not enough just to bomb the other side and hope that everybody will love you and go and kill Putin. So we've got to do something with what with the advantage. You got to take the advantage.
Glen, could you imagine back in 2022, then in 4.5 years, Ukraine will be in such a place like now?
I hate to say this, but I did, yes. And I think I wrote about it as well. I didn't think Ukraine would. I didn't recognise the way drones were going to go. I don't think anybody in the world did.
Yes.
And that's been a constant source of surprise and amazement, if I have to say this, with the changes and the changes to electronic warfare and the way that the remarkable way that Ukrainian engineers have created this constant adaptation and improvement, and it is remarkable, and it will be written about in history, the same way that the tank was written about, in the First World War. It will be the great change, but whether the war would be like this, whether Russia would actually prosecute the war in the way that it's done, I pretty much guessed that this would be it, because they're doing what they can do. I mean, if you go back, I actually wrote about and said many times about the fact that their army was basically based upon, alcoholics and thieves.
A paper tiger.
A paper tiger, as it was, and it still is in many ways. They're just beating us by sheer volume of numbers, and just pushing people into that huge space that is the border of Ukraine, and it's so big, that it's space. But now, filling the space with drones, it's changing the paradigm. But I go back to it. Changing the paradigm is not sufficient. There has to be another stage to that. There has to be a step to take the thing towards Russia.
And yeah, I just want to follow up on that. What should be Ukraine's next step then? It's
got to take back Crimea.
Yeah, I've heard you were saying that.
I say it, and I say it all the time. The way that this game is about taking back Crimea.
Like a ground military operation on the boat. How?
Even if it's 10 meters a day, even if it's 10 or 20 meters a day, we have to find a way of starting to take it back using, and that means a different doctrine. It means using the drones and artillery to dominate the battlefield, whether it's one space a day or in different places. But we have to do something, because we can't just sit here and let Russia pummel us on the front line and pummel us in that. We have to do something. And the best opportunity is thinking about how to fight the battle differently. And actually there are brigades that are beginning to do that. The problem is it's not a constant across the whole of the front line, because there still is not a common doctrine of how do we use, you could say everything is evolving so quickly, ways of drones, ways of electronic warfare, that there isn't a full understanding of how do we bring all this to battle and fight. Now, it was the same in the First World War with the tank. Nobody really knew how to use it. Well, we've reached that stage now where we actually have to start thinking about how do we get maximum effectiveness of movement out of what we've got, and how do we actually use that? Not just do it, but actually use it, which is the same, and use it in a nice general direction of Crimea. Are we stacking up lots of boats so we can go around the outside? I don't know. What are we doing to think about how we get there, other than just killing things? And it needs to be thought about. It needs to be thought about, and we need some innovative thinking in this. Well,
Ukrainians are good in this.
They are.
At some point.
They are.
But I thought that Ukrainian army could possibly squeeze Russian military from the occupied Crimea, at least with our strikes.
We're working on it, yes. But then you've got to go there. You know, you can't just leave it empty.
No, of course not.
And
I miss Crimea.
Yeah, good. I went in 2010, and I really enjoyed it. I walked the route of the charge of the Light Brigade, which was Crimean War, of course.
Yes.
And I walked down where they actually charged and looked at the ground on either side to see how it was that Russian guns were actually able to hit the British cavalry from the sides without the cavalry seeing them before they got there. It's really interesting because the ground is actually quite shallow, but the dips are sufficient that as you come round the corner, you can't actually see into these little, not gullies, but these shallow valleys that are on either side that the Russian guns were in. And of course, we lost everybody, nearly everybody. And it still goes down in British history. It's generally, you know, the charge of the Light Brigade is generally what people say when an officer in his training and in his development does something stupid. And they usually say, "You would have done well in the charge of the Light Brigade, young man." You know, that's...
You know, I quite often hear right now that Russia will break their teeth. Is that correct to say in Crimea? That historically it was like that.
Yeah, and it's quite possible. I mean, it's a mess at the moment. There's no question. Yeah. You know, we've hit lots of stuff, but have we? You know, we're not there. That's the problem. It's the flag that counts. It's the flag that will break Russia. Now, maybe we have to take one in on one of our remote boats and lift it off and put it in the middle somewhere. But the flag is necessary, and you know, that's the thing about drones, and even with any type of this sort of technical warfare, is that the bottom line is it's still got to be people that actually do the final bit, that are there in face. You can't do it any other way. Not yet, anyway. Maybe we have ground robots that can in the future, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, I had a Ukrainian military IT guy. I don't know, just how he's a co-founder of some IT company in Ukraine, and he is saying that future is very close to us with the robots and avatars. I don't know.
I think he's right in many ways. It is quite close, but then comes the next bit, which is production.
Yeah.
It's you know, I mean, technically, I mean, you can see in America that the robots are, and China, that some of the robots are phenomenal already and can actually do huge amounts of things. But we've got to produce them. We've actually got to build them and make them. And that's the problem at the moment. We don't have that manufacturing capacity.
One more about NATO I forgot to ask you. I was reading the argument just after the summit that NATO is a structure that created for the old world that does not exist anymore. Is that correct? That they are...
Well, I mean, yes, of course it's correct. It was. I mean, it was created for the old world. The question is, has it evolved?
Yeah, adaptation.
Well, I mean, it adapted, you could say it adapted for Iraq and Afghanistan and... in a way, has it adapted for the modern battlefield? Well, I think if you ask the Italians or you ask the Finns or you ask others, they would say yes, because we are not being invaded. All right, we're being messed with. You know, the other countries are being messed with hybrid warfare, but they're not being invaded. They're not being solidly attacked yet. And if they are, then NATO countries have said that they will retaliate. And I think that is one reason why Russia has not attacked anybody, because Russia does not want to face all the NATO countries, because that's too much for it. And they know that. They may think NATO's weak, but actually if you go and you look at the training that's going on and the adaptation that's going on with bringing in drones and bringing in different exercises and simulators to train in new ways, then I would say NATO is trying to bring itself up to date as quickly as possible. It may be a bit slow in some areas, and it may be a bit uncoordinated in some areas, but it's still working on it quite hard to do what it was originally set out for, which is defend those countries. And the fact that people still want to join it, the fact that Sweden and Finland joined just recently and very quickly, tells you that they think it's valuable. And I frankly, when I was in Finland 20 years ago as defence attaché, if you'd have said that 20 years' time you're going to join NATO, someone would have punched me because they thought, we can do this on our own and we can do it. No. People realise that you've got to be together, you've got to be solid together. And that's why this NATO summit, by finishing at the finish, they were talking about solidarity and togetherness and everything else. And that's actually quite important. But that's about NATO. Whether that actually reads across into Ukraine in the way that we would like, only time will tell.
That's kind of a painful question for me, our membership.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a painful question for lots of people. It's not just for you. And actually it's a painful question for a lot of, I'm going to say, ex-military like myself, who think that actually that there should be a much better discussion about this. But there are still, lots of things that NATO countries hold dear, one of which is human rights. And unless there is corruption, unless there's human rights and some attempt at those things, then people are not happy. Okay, we know American government is corrupt at the moment. And there are other countries that are not as squeaky clean as they should be. Mm-hmm. But generally, there is a desire that there are common values across everywhere. And Ukraine has not yet managed to convince a lot of people about the quality of the common values. It's not the fighting ability; it's the values that are, that are the difficult thing. And that's why Sweden and Finland were so easy to get in, because it was quite clear what their values were and what their attitudes to things were.
Speaking about people that are spreading Russian narratives in Europe, a year ago you gave a very interesting interview to Ukrainian media saying that there are a lot of people, maybe not pro-Russians like Fides from European Parliament, but still people that are obstruct the decisions, military decision, financial decision about Ukraine. We had those Viktor Orban, the former Hungarian Prime Minister. A year from that moment when you said that, who are those delayers right now?
I'm going to jump out of that one and just say that actually in a year I've come to the conclusion that the thing is much worse than I thought before, than I thought a year ago. Because I had a view in my mind. The front of Orban was quite obvious a year ago, but now looking around, it's obvious that the disease, if you want to call it that, the Russian disease is much deeper around in countries than it's obvious, and a lot of people are politicians in different parts of different countries, whether it's in Germany or otherwise, that more politicians have been bought than I first imagined. And also there's a strength to it that is quite difficult. For example, in Bulgaria, that Radev, who was the president, and Radev's first move, he's former Air Force commander, for goodness sakes, in Bulgaria, and could have, if he'd stayed in, would likely have become a NATO Air Force commander somewhere. Yeah. And then, he goes in as president and immediately goes to see Putin for his first job. Now he's back. He's come out of being president, but he's prime minister. So, this it's not just a degree of disease. It's that this disease is much stronger than we actually give it credit for. And so, Orban will go, others will come. We've had a problem in UK. We had Brexit. That was clearly Russia-inspired, and it won, and we were foolish because people didn't believe that then. Now people understand, because the fact about where the money came from is a bit more clear, and the fact that some of the politicians were bought is a bit more clear. Some of the Reform Party politicians, and one or two have just been, have been in front of court for treasonous activities. So it's deeper. But so we've got to beat this. We've got to beat this. And I think there's a bit too much acceptance of, as I said, delay, because delay is the big thing. There's a bit too much acceptance of delay and not enough questioning of it when it happens in, for example, the US. You know, the US has been delaying us solidly on part of missiles, money, you know, money from the Pentagon, money that should have been coming and should have been with things. Oh, where is it? Oh, well, we haven't organised everything yet. And there's a battle there in the Pentagon, because there's the pro-Ukrainian military and civil servants who are pushing gently away, and then there are other people that are, as I say, delaying, including Hegseth, who is delaying stuff that's supposed to be coming this way. And you know, we're too nice sometimes with all these things. We don't question enough about it. We just accept that it's what it is, but it shouldn't be like that.
But I was surprised how Mark Rutte was, you know, maneuvering next to American President Donald Trump, you know. This is also kind of a, I don't know, masterpiece behavior, unique behavior.
Well, it's unique behavior, and but I don't think that one can credit Trump's change of heart to Rutte, which some people are saying that, you know, Rutte has done this by talking. Nah. It's Ukrainian drones have changed Trump's heart, nothing else.
Seriously?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, Trump likes a winner. Trump likes a winner, and if he feels that if he feels that Putin is no longer his friend, and maybe Putin is not pressurizing him as much anymore, because it's quite hard to pressurize Trump because Trump is now ill, and when he's ill, he doesn't follow any logic, and I'm pretty sure that Putin realizes that a conversation with Trump is a conversation of fresh air. And it goes nowhere because he can't remember what he said yesterday.
You mean physically ill?
Physically, he's got dementia. I mean, if you watch him every day and listen to his, his speech in NATO was a masterpiece of gobbledygook, and it was. I mean, the man has got dementia. The man is ill, and he shouldn't be there. For the strongest country in the world is being led by someone who can't remember, who thinks, you know, the Islamic Republic of Japan.
Of Japan, yeah.
You know, I mean, that should be enough to remove anybody. I mean, if you make one mistake like that, okay, we can laugh. Everybody makes a mistake when you're talking quickly. But to make consistent mistakes day after day after day after day, and lying about stuff day after day after day after day, you would think that some of the Americans would actually grasp that he's not quite all there.
I'm still surprised that we see in the world, a lot of unity around Ukraine, but not enough unity against Russia. It's still, I'm not stopping to be surprised.
That's a very good question, or very good comment, sorry. Yeah, and you know, well, that's because they bought so many people. I mean, here we are now, Zimbabwe, who leading the IOC, International Olympic Committee, suggesting that Russia should be back in the Olympics.
Yes.
Now, that is a typical thing, you know, that is the sort of thing that you're talking about. And it just means that lots of people have been bought. They've been bought in some way or another, whether that's you know, hey, you can come on the board of Gazprom when you finish being Prime Minister or things like this. Goodness knows. But especially as Gazprom is going downhill. But and you don't want to go into Gazprom anymore, but there must be something else that they can offer. And yeah, I mean, I've been surprised as well, but I think part of it's fear. You know, I mean, the nuclear bit is always played up too much. The other thing is, you know, what happens if Russia falls apart? You have to point out that the Soviet Union fell apart and the Central Asian states are doing very well, thank you. You know, quite nicely, and they're developing. And if Siberia would become a Far Eastern state, just like Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan. So I don't think one needs to worry about Russia falling apart. We make too much of those. But I think the other thing is it's the buying of favors and the buying and the paying of money under the table and the maybe blackmail in the case of Epstein, blackmail, and you know, you went to the island, you've got to do what we say, sort of thing. Otherwise, we're going to tell your wife and everybody. So I think that there's, those things. Russia has been working at those. I said yesterday in the interview that they've been working on them since 1917. And I was contradicted and told it was actually longer than that Russia has actually been working against Western societies for a long time. And the Russian playbook is the same as it was in effectively 1917, to undermine Western society, to undermine capitalism. They're still doing it.
So they are just finding a dirt on any politician, having the folder, a huge on them.
Well, and once you've got one, you've usually got his friends as well.
Okay.
Especially if they, there are other spies and there are those that bought, whether it's because they're short of money and they're working in a key position, or whether it's a love fest with as we've had with Russian diplomats and things like this. And the problem is that each time you get one of these activities that happens, it's never one person. It's always like them and their friends who pick up the group, and then you continue it, and then one of them becomes prime minister, and whoopee, you've got the prime minister and his friends, and you tell them this is a good person to have on your team, and that good person to have on your team is also bought, and this is going on still. I
thought nothing is capable to ruin Donald Trump's reputation because he doesn't have any.
Yeah. Well, no, but the others do. And Rubio had a reputation. Hegseth, Johnson, all these people have got reputations which are going downhill, and all of them have effectively supported Russia since the serious war started. Lots and lots of Republicans are turning now, and beginning to realise it wasn't perhaps quite such a good idea.
You mentioned the military state of the morality of Ukrainian soldiers, as far as I understood you. Do you meet with the Ukrainian soldiers quite often?
Yes.
And talk to them?
Yes.
Because I was reading that Ukrainian ombudsman, she was arguing that after 40 days on the front line, they have to have rotation. But this is so a painful question for Ukrainian soldiers. Sometimes they are just being there for ages.
Well, I mean, there are apparently, and I'm going to say don't quote me on this, but there are apparently a couple who've been 400 days in the front line.
I know that.
Yeah.
Well, I have friends.
And I've got friends who are there as well.
I mean,
and the problem, I go back to it. The problem is that we have not yet got doctrine and training of how to deal with this problem. In other words, you've got if you go to a proper staff college in Europe, you discuss things like this endlessly. In other words, how are we going to do it? There is actually doctrine close to what we're talking about, with getting people out of those holes.
Yes.
Which is withdrawal under contact, withdrawal in contact, and there is doctrine for that, and it's practiced First World War, Second World War. The actual logic, the change of weapon systems, yes, but the actual logic of the planning and the activity is exactly the same. So there are things to do that. But you see, a lot of the officers have never been trained. They've learned on the job. Now, learning on the job is okay. It makes you good. But it doesn't make you good in some things, which is like planning. Okay. And where you need planning at multi-levels, where you need 1, 2, 3, 4 levels, all to be working exactly the same to do a particular activity. We don't have that yet. So you've got brigades doing some things, you've got corps doing some things, and they're not necessarily doing it in the same way across the front. They're not necessarily even doing it in some cases. So you've got some brigades that are very active, and some brigades that are passive. And they're basically just surviving the war out to stay alive, if you can call it that. But the actual thinking about how to do all this, it needs more thinking, and then it needs training. People have to be pulled off the front, and they have to go to proper training in colleges and places to actually to discuss how to do this. And then there needs to be writing. There needs to be doctrine written that people can discuss and argue about of the best way of doing something. And those activities, a lot of those activities are simply not there in the defence forces.
Glen, are you helping Ukraine
I'm trying.
with that management?
I'm trying,
on the
yeah.
front line?
I'm working with the Human Rights Ombudsman, and some of the things that come out from that are things that, like the Doctrine. There is nothing written on this. Now, that some of that is purely and simply because that the drone war is so new. So nobody's actually sat down and worked out how to use this for manoeuvre, how to actually to make this work with tanks and guns as a written document, as a written idea, as a formal way of training new officers. This is how we're going to do it. So some of this just hasn't been written down, and it needs to be. In other words, there needs to be some formalisation of how we do things, and the best ideas need to come back as lessons learnt, and those lessons learnt dug back into people so they actually get it. And that lessons learnt is still not, and after action review, as Batusov calls it, is still not a solid thing across the front. We still have more bureaucratic papers than we have operational papers. And that is a problem still.
Yeah, and on the paper, soldiers on the zero line have to be there for 12 days on the paper. But usually they're standing there as much as they could possibly hold the position because there are no one to replace them. Glen,
Well, I'll just stop you there.
No.
We're one of the brigades that was visited recently.
Yeah.
Okay. They've got 24 soldiers out in the position in the front line and 2,000 soldiers in the brigade.
Okay. Plenty of people to replace them. Okay.
So that's an organisational and leadership matter.
Leadership matter. But then again, is that still necessary to be on the zero line in the trenches right now? I mean, because of the drone,
some people are not even on the zero line. They're on the +1,
on the +2
and +3 lines.
Yeah. Yes.
Because
of the drones,
the answer to that is yes and no. Because we're still in that's still in that military age of discovery of actually what we need and what we don't need. And what we don't need is soldiers 400 days in the front line, because it just destroys them physically and everything else. I mean, Sersky quite rightly has put a rule, I think, that maximum is 60 days. But then following up from that rule needs to be the doctrine of how do we change them? How do we actually fight to change them? What do we have to do? And to do that, to get the boys out, you've got to dominate the airspace. Absolutely dominate it, which means that every drone in the sky from Russian side has got to be taken out and kept out for the duration of the time it takes to either take them out or to change them, depending which is needed. Because in some cases, there is no strong argument of why they're there still. They're there because they're there, which is the great line from Zulu. We're here because we're here, and it's so these things need more discussion, and they need discussion. And unfortunately, we're not going to get that discussion from the general staff. They're not into that sort of level of thinking. I think the organisation is too big and too heavy, but it needs to happen. So how do we get them out? What is the plan to get them out? So you've got to go back maybe 3-4 weeks beforehand of the time you want to remove them, to collect enough drones, to do the investigation of the battle space, so that you actually know what you're suppressing when you bring them out. Real problem if they're surrounded.
Yes.
Real problem if they're surrounded, which means you've actually got to do something which maybe we can't do at the moment. Maybe it's just impossible to do it. But we've got to actually think about how we might be able to do it. What sort of attack can clear a lane for them to come through? Whether that's using technology, whether it's using human beings, the best soldiers to go in there and clear it. But you've got to clear the airspace first. You've got to take out all the enemy drones, and you've got to hold them out for probably 12, 15, 20 hours, at least that. and suppress the ground, at least that, using, you know, rocket launchers and guns, because those people are valuable at the front. If we don't take them as value, then you have this thing as, if they're not valuable, then I'm not valuable. And therefore, you know, this is why the Marines have this line of, you know, no Marine left behind, Royal Marines, no Marine left behind. And we need that ethos. That ethos is important. And that, if the military doesn't have that ethos, then what value is any human being? What value is any person? So, you know, you could arguably you should all, I mean, in most Western militaries, the man on the front line is king and everybody else supports him.
Yes.
Arguably, those guys in the trenches are the most valuable property of Ukraine that Ukraine has got, and we should be working out everything on them and to get them out, because they are doing something that nobody else is doing, and they shouldn't be left to die. Whatever happens, even if it costs us more people to get them out, you're still showing the value of that person in the front line. And therefore you've got to get them out, because it underpins the complete moral integrity of the armed forces. Everything depends upon your value of the human being. The person who's in the fight, in the shit, basically, is the person of the highest value, not the commander-in-chief. It actually needs to be the other way around, front to back. As you get more senior, you're less value, because you're less in the fight. You can do less for Ukraine in some ways back there than you can down there, and that's what drives me here.
Yeah,
that's what makes me come back. Is, you know, the value of the soldier, and I see them all as mine, as my soldiers.
Glen, that's impressive. If you had a chance to, if you had a task to neutralize Russian dictator Putin, how would you do that?
We've got to find him first and find which one of them he is, because there's obviously at least three.
At least three.
At least three, yeah, judging by the pictures that people have said of different shaped face and ears and everything else. I'm not sure we're going to be able to. And when the real one's dead, I'm not sure we'll ever know.
Which one?
Which one it was.
That's concerning.
But you see, I don't know if you saw, about a few weeks ago, that one of the bodyguards actually mentioned one of them's name.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so, I mean, I thought that was brilliant. I thought it was wonderful. And it didn't get the attention that it should have got. Because then we should have been asking Trump, well, which one did you talk to? Which one of the three lightly
Well,
Putins
I think the real one.
You think the real one?
The real one,
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. But you can't be 100% sure.
No, of course.
You can't be 100% sure.
Glen, that was amazing. Thank you so much for your insight, brilliant answers, and just your perspective on the Russia's war in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Not at all. Thank you very much.